Welcome to the ATP Project. You're with your hosts, Steve and Godfrey Jeff. And today we have got Dr. Beau Miles. And we're going to be talking to him about some of his wacky, I'm going to say wacky, and I don't mean that in an offensive way, some crazy far out adventures that he does. And we're going to be talking about nutrition because he's tried special diets for 40 days, really special diets. I'm going to ask him about that. And we're going to ask him about his kayaking adventures, his running adventures. And we may as well start there because one of your most popular YouTube videos is when you ran a marathon, which is, just for those people who don't know, 26 miles or 41.95 kilometres. But you did a marathon in 24 hours, which doesn't sound very fast. But do you want to talk about how that eventuated and how that started? That's an amazing story.
Yeah, well, it's nice to be here, chaps. The marathon's such a famous distance, and yet it's a convoluted distance too. You know, it's kind of the actual distance we run now, as you said, Steve. I was cooked up by, I think it was the Queen. It was the 1906 Olympics, I think, in London, where they just needed a distance to get from A to B that sort of worked with the crowds and whatnot. So it's not actually the distance that a lot of people think it is between, Athens and Marathon. But, yeah. I mean, it's a famous distance now. It's become a thing for 100 odd years. And I remember I was home once and I figured out, I'm not much of a Google kind of person, or I don't have a fancy watch, but I figured out that my block that I live on, little country block, is exactly a mile. Smack on. It's about 4 metres too much, actually, if you go into my driveway. So I've got a 1 mile block. And I was thinking during my PhD when I was sort of housebound and I wanted to be outside, I just went for one lap of the block one day. And I've never been for such a short run in my life, but it was just enough to get a bit of a sweat up. And it was a great circuit breaker for I was at sort of loggerheads with an idea in the PhD. And voila, I had this lovely formula that sort of reset my workday. And I know I was putting on a bit of weight at the time doing the PhD. And I thought when I get this out of this thing and I'm on the other side of the PhD, I'm going to run a marathon worth of my blocks around the block. I'm going to run a marathon around the block, but I'm going to spread it out across the day and do a whole bunch of things that I've been wanting to do in between. So I made it this sort of project that included all the things I've been wanting to do during the PhD but couldn't, and running. And it was a great, and you know what? A lot of the crew I told about it thought it was a bit of a flimsy idea. You know, what's really what people are going to watch you do chores and run around the block? That's a crap idea. But lo and behold, it's my most successful idea. Because of its sort of, it's been copied all over the world for lots of charities, and there's heaps of YouTube people that have done it, which is I'm so chuffed about, and it was ace. It was a really fun project.
Yeah, actually, funny, sometimes you don't start off, it's like we always talk about, whatever you're doing, whatever project that you've got, and you go, and I've heard people interview singers before going, when you were writing the song, did you know it was going to be a top hit? No, they just wrote it because they loved it and because they enjoyed it. And then you just don't know what's going to resonate and find a home with people where they go, you know what, I can identify with that. That's actually makes sense to me. And that's absolute gold. I mean, if you can inspire people to make a difference, make a change in their life by doing something as simple as that, that's probably what resonates as well too. It's just a really simple idea.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's two-pronged what you've just said there, Jeff, in that I totally agree. Everyone would write a one-hit wonder or be a raging success overnight if they knew the secret formula. So we don't. And I suppose what you then have to do is trust that your idea is worth telling or worth doing or worth spending time on. That's one. And two, I suppose I'm a really reluctant inspirational character. I struggle to think often where and how this bloody bearded bloke that lives on a little farm and does things is inspirational to others. I'm very endeared by the idea, but I never set out to do it. And so that surprise is one, very nice, and two, I think, I suppose authentic, because I'm not aiming for that. I'm a really reluctant advice giver. I don't get it, and in fact, I'm not a very good teacher sometimes because of it as well. I just sort of I do my thing, and I'm quite selfish, and so I think it's wonderful when people think there's something to it.
No, you know what? I just love that. And this is part of the thing why I think Australians typically are generally so well received and so well liked is because we're relatively if you like, laid back. We don't pump our own tires. We're not we're brilliant. I'm unbelievable. I'm the best in the world. Let me show you. And this is going to be a killer idea and we're going to dominate the world. And, we're relatively like effectively, let's have a crack at it. If it makes sense, it makes sense. And if it doesn't, we don't get all bent out of shape and lose our whole world crashes down because something that we tried didn't work. And it's that laid back, easygoing sort of give it a crack sort of attitude that I think really resonates. And I think it's something really special about Australia's culture and New Zealand, the Anzac sort of spirit as well too, is that we don't take ourselves too seriously. And as you said as well too, so when you start to get the accolades and when people start to go, oh, that's a great idea, we're almost a little bit surprised by our own success at times, which I think is really great. I think humility is an ingredient that is missing in a lot, especially in this modern culture where I think the perception versus reality, of people putting up a persona on social media and all the rest of it, it's a trap. It's a bit of a victim. But I'm just picking up on that because I really resonate with that. I really, really love that whole, I'm kind of surprised by the success and I just did it because it made sense to me and then other people found value in it. I love it.
Yeah, well, I think we'd struggle to keep the fire burning if we were exactly what we thought we were. If you've got this raging confidence and everything just works out for you in life, I'm not sure why you would continue to challenge yourself or to do things that are difficult. You'd just sit on the couch and think that you're done. In a sense, you've reached your pinnacle, and so there always has to be somewhere to go, or you have to believe there is. Otherwise, I think you become that couch potato, or just super arrogant, or I suppose unrelatable to anyone else around you. So humility is hard. And it's nice if you've actually got a healthy dose of it that's natural and you don't have to just cook it up.
Yeah. You're far from a couch potato because while most people who live, say, 90 kilometres from work drive to work, even 50 kilometres or 20 or 10 kilometres, you live 90 kilometres from work and you decided one day not to take your car. You decided to walk to work that day or 2 days.
Yeah, no, I thought of the...
I'm dobbing you in, mate. This is your new book. It's all in here, mate. This is the greatest book where the backyard adventure. I know you don't like the word "the" because I remember you were interviewed once before, but this is a perfect title for this book.
No, it's wrong, Steve. It's the backyard.
Oh,
no, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
but you talk in this book about deciding to walk to work one day, and you live 90 kilometres or about 50-something miles.
There. Yeah, look, I didn't decide on overnight that I'm just going to walk to work. It was a few weeks in the planning, but the most simplistic thing I've ever done, really, because it was so stripped back. I've never done something so basic. I decided to walk to work. I knew that I was going to spend 1 or 2 nights on the side of the road. And in fact, the first time I did it, because I did it twice in the end, the first time I did it, I didn't wear shoes, thinking that I want to really go back to basics. And that was a really flawed experiment. I lasted about 8 kilometres before one of the film crew gave me my shoes. But yeah, I just wanted to be really accountable for things like shelter and water and food. And maybe it harks a little bit back to just how vulnerable we are as this, I'm often considered a bloke who can go and live in the bush for many months with nothing, with just his dries a bone on and a ream of string and a bloody stick of chewing gum, and that's it, and he's okay. It's just not the case. I've got some good skills that would do okay out there in the bush, but I'm not like the Indigenous folks who walked around here and just were able to read the landscape and live within it so much better than me. I'm a house dweller still. And so this was just a sort of an in-between version of just trying to live off a different version of humanity, which is what people throw out, what money they lose, what water I could get from cow troughs or from a creek that is sick and I'm not going to die from. So I had to make these small decisions and go hunting in a very different way between here and work. It took 30 hours and I sustained myself, and it was fantastic. It was a really good insight into me and my flaws and humanity's flaws. And in saying that too, some really amazing, lots of people stopped and said, "Are you okay, mate? You want to lift?"
Yeah, right.
All unsolicited. I didn't have my thumb out and they pull over and say, "Hey, fella, door swings open. You want to lift somewhere?" And that melts your heart. That's really good. I don't know this person. I could be a wacko. And so it was excellent. It was a really good insight.
I loved it because you were feeding yourself on the way by picking up a little bit of bananas that the people have thrown out the window. You gave a great survival tip called Roundabouts, where you talked about this is where all the stuff falls out of people's car, and that's where you found most of your stuff at the two roundabouts you crossed as you went up. Because you've got to remember, for people who aren't listening, the walk is not like a deserted street. You walked the M1, which is a very busy road in Melbourne, goes southeast.
Well,
those who don't know,
I'm fascinated. I mean, how much money did you find? And what's the most interesting thing that you found?
$14.40. I found a penis, which for a few moments I thought was a real thing.
Hang on. Steve.
I know.
Steve been looking for one of those.
That was not in your book. I remember
it could be yours, Steve. Has it got a name written on it?
I've been missing one for ages.
He's got very, very small writing. You might not be able to say Steve.
No, it just got S-E written on it. Sorry for that.
That's pretty funny, lads. You guys, that's good. You just turned that around. I was being quite serious because it was quite a strange thing to find when it was dawn at the time on day 2, and I'm wandering into Melbourne and I see this very perfectly lifelike thing on the side of the road, and chances are it wasn't real, but there was a little moment there where I'm 10 or 12 meters away. I think, geez, I've just found a John Wayne Bobbitt type thing.
Exactly. I was thinking Bobbitt.
Yep.
They call it bobbiting now after that.
Yeah,
so
right.
They actually do. They call it bobbiting. But he got his sewn back on, so it definitely wasn't his. Turned into a porn star after that, would you believe? Anyway, sorry, I'm getting off track, but keep going.
No, that's a good track to follow. So it was about $14 I found, and a penis, and that was the big sort of story. Lots happened, and the money thing, you talk about, Steve-O. I have this roundabout theory. I'm going to turn that into a film, actually. I'm going to go gold panning in Canberra, which has got more roundabouts per capita than anyone. And it's genuine. It's totally genuine. Just like you go gold panning in a river where gold is going to be found at particular river bends in an eddy line where the gold filters to the top, it is exactly the same at the stop parts. Wherever someone stops and the outside current of roundabouts, it's full of money with all of the gravel. It's remarkable.
Wow, that's awesome.
And so,
I can imagine we're going to see a new age, 21st century fossicas. You're going to see just droves of people now around stop signs and roundabouts.
But Jeff, we went to the servo and bought, I think it was Doritos and a chocolate bar, if my memory serves me. Was that right? There's nothing nutritious at all. It was just that sort of thing. Yeah.
No, Steve-O, that was totally calculated. My wife gave me heck for it as well. It was a big thing that it didn't make the film in the end, but man, she rambled on for ages about why I was eating such junk, and you're dead right, but it was the most calorific.
Exactly.
I just wanted, I had $5 and I needed the most amount of calories, and that was going to be about it. So it was strategic.
I hear you. I mean, Steve, we always talk about that we're genetically engineered, if you like, to seek out sugars and fats, and you've nailed both of those two things in there. So.
If you had to walk 90 kilometres to work, I mean, goodness me.
Oh, mate, I wouldn't be, giving you a hard... Wouldn't be giving you a hard time over bloody having some Doritos if you've just walking 90 kilometres. I'm sure the calorie deficit was in your favour.
It was. I was blowing in the breeze. I did my paddling film, which comes out in a week and a half. That was 18,000 calories or thereabouts. And you compare that to my regular commute to work, which is a cup of tea. So it's usually about 30 calories, 40 calories to get to work, and this was 18,000. So, and what I compare that to is, I mean, that's an arbitrary figure in a sense because they're such different journeys, and yet they both get me to the same point. And your experiences in that line between home and work are so staggeringly different. It would be like going up Everest backwards underwater, dragged by a whole bunch of nymphs from that weren't alive. And it was such a different way of getting from A to B that the experience was. It was remarkable, and it just proves what you can do in these sort of mundane lands we think we inhabit.
Yeah.
Now, just to reiterate, like if I walked 90 kilometres, I'd have a backpack, I'd have water this, I'd have sleeping this, I'd have that, and it'd be piled up. You took literally nothing.
Yeah. I took I had a good hat. That was most important to me. And I had my jacket on the second time I did it, and good walking shoes, actually running shoes, which was a failing. But the first time I did it, I just had a shirt, a hat, and pants, no shoes, no sunglasses, no sunscreen. And the rest I had to make up. So all my water, my food, sunscreens, lip balms, you name it, I had to source from the highway, as if I'd kind of get to work and I was kind of there as I would normally be, well-fed, watered, not burnt, well-slept. I had to try and, that was the aim.
What do you mean that running shoes was a mistake versus walking shoes?
Well, I have, it was the first time it's ever happened, Jeff, because I don't really get blisters, not really. I wore some running shoes that I've only ever worn running, and so when I was walking in them, my heel strike, and I wore because I was so cold on the first walk during the first night, I wore thick socks, which is ridiculous. I know my feet really well, and I wear thin piled woolen socks, and I wore these big fat things to get me warmth at night. And the combination of that plus heel striking whilst walking in running shoes that I don't heel strike in, I just got mega blisters. It was ridiculous. Just a total rookie mistake.
Yeah.
Rather than wearing just my old work boots or something that I usually walk in. So, the old dog's still learning a new trick.
Who's the guy that wrote the 8-hour work week, or was it the 4? Come on, he learned flamenco dancing and became like a world champion. Really smart guy from the States. I forget his name. I can't believe it.
Yeah, it's one of the...
Well,
No.
He was saying, though...
I just know the cover of his book.
He was saying, and I didn't really know this, and I've watched a few runners, that you should actually run on your toes. Tim Ferriss, there we go. He's a smart bloke, one of the smartest going around. But he was saying that you should actually run on your toes. So I'm just listening to that, and even the way that, running shoes and all the rest of it, is that when we run, we've actually learned to run with a heel strike action, which is actually totally wrong. We should actually, even long distance runners should run on their toes. I'm not an expert on long distance running. I barely, make it to the end of the street and back. But I just found it was interesting, obviously, that the choice of footwear, again, you're spending all that time on your feet. That was probably must have been one of the most impactful decisions that you'd made. Yeah,
it was silly. It was a bad decision. And look, I've read a lot about running and know lots about running, mostly by default of running a lot. I've run 3 to 7 times a week for 25 years now. So
do you agree with that statement with Tim Ferriss? Do you think that that's true, or is that not true?
No, not necessarily, because I've tried all these things, and you can reinvent it. And when I watch kids run, some do run beautifully naturally on their front toes, and some run midfoot and some heel strike. And they're not trying to run. They're not trying to do anything. They're just running, right? They're not thinking about it. They're just doing whatever's natural. So from an evolutionary standpoint, I know that the best runners probably run on their toes. I run with one of Australia's best ultra runners every so often around here. And he's a total toe runner. His heel never touches the ground. The back half of his shoe is brand new. And I don't. I'm a mid striker. But I reckon in some respects, when you watch his legs too, and look, the scientists know way more about this than me, but in some respects, I'm not sure of his long range ability compared to mine, perhaps. I reckon I could run 1,000 Ks and injure myself less than him at 1,000 kilometres. So I think we both have our sweet spots. He's much quicker over 50 Ks than me. But I reckon if we were to do that
sprint,
for a couple of weeks. Yeah, that's right. Just the short stuff. So, it's really, people are really boffiny at this, and I'm not. And I'd probably rather go with that, because I think we're not all one fit.
That's
evolutionary we're not either.
Hey, do you remember that runner, that old guy that won the Dunlops? Do you remember this guy? I love that story. My gosh, my brain is not working. What's his name, Steve?
Wasn't Cliff Young, was it?
Cliff Young.
He mentions him. You actually last part of that marathon. Well, you tell the story, actually.
he was.
Well, I probably don't know it as well as you guys, but Cliffy Young, he was a sheep spud farmer and used to just shuffle around in his gumboots around his farm, and he never had a tractor to round up his sheep. And so he was just this lean, total dude, this fella who had a massive capacity to keep going. And he was that famous tortoise and the hare story where it was the first race between Melbourne and Sydney.
Yep.
It was this huge thing put on by the Westfield shopping complex for 10 grand. Anyway, he wins by days.
Yeah.
and gave all the money to the other competitors. He felt so bad about winning, but yeah, he was behind he was dead last for days with all these front runners out the front, but he just kept going. He never slept. It was amazing.
It's funny because my wife has just started this new thing. She's in her mid-40s now, and she's going all these sexy young things that are flogging me doing these fit stops and all the rest of it. And I said, don't worry, darling. I said, it's, you're the arduous turtle. They're the sexy rabbits, right? And that's lasted now. That's turned into a thing in our household. But you're right. It's about not stopping. It's about going. And the thing I loved about it is that, all these athletes are out for the 10 grand and they're all sponsored by these big names and they've got these amazing running and here he turns up in a couple of literally Dunlop volley flat, which if you don't know, virtually has nothing inside it. It's just a thin piece of bloomin', rubber on your foot, and he smashed all of them. So
quite funny.
It's great. It comes back to kind of that just unassuming, and even the fact I didn't know he actually gave away the money. It's just it's awesome. It's just a great, and this is the Australia that I hope that especially the younger guys start to find again. That mateship, that camaraderie, that humility, that give it a crack, not talking yourself up, and just get out there and do it. And I really love stories like that.
I love, we talk about ultra running and you did a 50K run. It must be a few years ago now. Now, can you explain to people how you nutritionally prepared for that specific 50-kilometre run you did? Do you remember what you ate? Yeah,
I remember very intimately. Yeah, Steve, what I ate. I had 191 tins of beans. In fact, no, that's not true. I had 187 tins of beans in the lead up to that race, and then ate 4 during the race itself. I had 4 tins of beans on my little back. It means that my entire body is beans and the slurry that they were in. And so that's what I did. I ate beans for 39 days, and then on the 40th day, ran an ultra marathon through the mountains. And so it was this whole process of the keto diet, or a similar sort of version of a keto diet, or a mono diet, which had its huge strengths and weaknesses. And what it did, it was a massive insight into, we all say we are what we eat, but we don't really know. That's a very abstract thing to say, because you don't often associate genuine feelings, genuine outputs of your day-to-day with the things you've eaten. And a lot of us probably will, especially you folks. This is your game. But when you strip that right back and you just eat one thing, you have a very good front row seat into a particular food giving you a particular set of feelings that are comprehensible. And so let's say our regular day is full of 7s, 8s and 9s out of 10. We have this sort of roller coaster of top-end experiences that we're continually trying to chase. That's what humans do. We want to repeat the good feelings. Now, if you can't dip into those 8s and 9s and 10s that you've usually had, and you're just evolutionizes how you think of yourself as a human. And it did. And by halfway through my 40 days of eating beans, I realized just how much our food dictates our outputs, our number systems of how we feel, our personality. I was humorless for weeks because I just had no pep. I had no desire to crack a gag or be fun with my wife or be beige human.
Yeah.
It was fascinating.
Do you want to know the nutritional biochemistry behind it? Because we've got a few nerds watching. A lot of people, like I'm a nutritionist, so I know this. There is an amino acid lacking in beans, which is normally not a problem because you normally eat other stuff with it. But the amino acid is called tryptophan. And tryptophan is the amino acid that turns into, in your brain, something called serotonin. And serotonin is the chemical that keeps you happy, gives you joy and all that sort of stuff. So as soon as you said you're going to eat beans for nothing but 40 days, I'm thinking, his moods are going to go terrible because you're going to be completely void of tryptophan. You didn't eat anything else, remember? You didn't have normal foods. You just had tea, I think, if my memory serves me, with it. And that was it. So tryptophan levels would have dropped very quickly because that's an essential amino acid the body can't make. And it was fascinating because the way you got through it was you took the labels off the beans. So you'd open a tin and you wouldn't know what he was eating. Well, until he opened it.
It's funny because, and I want to get to a question in a minute, and that's why. But I remember when I was a young lad of 16 working at the Snow Deli, and my mum decided to give me some beans, some split lentil soup, and it was the first time I'd eaten it, and I don't think I would have done too well in a long distance run, but I tell you, probably about an hour into my shift, I don't think I've actually run through a shopping centre. I reckon I was probably running Ben Johnson's type speeds on, powered, because I had to find a toilet, and seriously, thank God that there was one that was open, because otherwise I would have been using the piss trough. But I was motoring, right? So how on earth did you not have a similar sort of, I mean, that's a lot of beans, which Steve, obviously, you must be conditioned to eating beans. Because, I mean...
Well, yeah.
I mean,
well, not really.
I
mean, I love beans. I'm a bit of a billy goat. I don't have a fussy stomach. I never have, which has been really lucky. I can eat anything and convert it into whatever. When I generally run long distances, I just eat regular food. I don't have to have the souped up stuff. In saying that, there are, the hotter it gets and the more acute the environment gets, then I need all the help I can get from folks like ATP and things that can give me some massive bang for buck. So I get that. But for beans, look, there was certainly a sweet spot within it that I thought I really liked this, but it was mostly a sociological thing in that I really liked my lack of choice. It was liberating. I think, you guys have got, you've got the coffee on the table, and then there's some souped up thing Steve-O's drinking out of the thing. And I imagine that has wonderful things in it, as does the coffee, right?
Beer.
These things dictate and punctuate our day. Coffee, lunch, apples, pears, a snack, a biscuit, a sugar tube, or a chunk of sugar into your cup of tea. All these things, and we put them in there because they make us feel a certain way and they map our day and all this stuff. When you strip all that back and that's all gone, your day is a very different looking thing, because you're only eating beans when you're hungry, and that's it. You go back to this sort of Forrest Gump thing. You eat when you're hungry, and all you've got is one food choice. Bloody liberating. You don't think about it.
It's actually an extrapolation of that, I think, as Steve Jobs did it, and there's a whole host of other people that did it as well too. He was always wearing that black turtleneck jumper, right? And it's funny because I've dressed up today for you, Beau. No, actually, it was that, but also I've got another meeting to go to. But most of the time, I'm just wearing exactly the same T-shirt as Steve, and I've got 5 of them in my cupboard, and I've got a couple of pairs of black jeans, and I just wear the same thing, because you're right. When I get up in the morning, I just want to throw the same thing, and it just gives me a little bit more time. Takes away, where's this bloody iron? And we've got this stupid little ironing board that my wife has, right, which is about this size, because she's quite small and I'm quite tall, and it's just like, I'm not doing this. This is just rubbish. So it does. It liberates the headspace, and it gives me back time every morning. And it's funny, Steve Jobs said that. So I guess what you're saying in terms of that as well too, it does. It frees up your mental capacity to worry about maybe bigger things.
It can be very intense, but it can also be, and rightfully so, but it can also be pretty frivolous. I'm not a foodie as such, and yet I love food, and that's why I'm not a foodie. I think it's a bit more of a utility than it is something to be glorified, and yet I'm torn with that because it's somewhat contradictory. I love beautiful food and organic food and stuff we've grown ourselves. And that's often really hard. And so is a really beautiful plate full of food that you pay a lot of money for at a restaurant. So in some respects, they're the same thing. And yet I tend to be of the latter, of that I just want simplistic, good food, and I don't need all the fancy stuff.
There was a time when you did a little run where you needed some fancy food and lots of calories. You want to talk about that run that you did across the snowy mountains of Australia? That's a 660-kilometre run you did. Oof. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, I've trumped that since, Steve-O, in a sense. Yeah, the film hasn't come out yet. I didn't run as far, but I ran more intensively and faster, and that was the McMillan's run. That was 220 Ks, and I did that a few months ago. Whoa. In harder terrain with less of a track. It was really nice to be back in the realm of that kind of fitness and that kind of physicality. I haven't done that for almost a decade, which was a real shock to the system. I did the math and thought, you know what, last time I did something like this was a long time ago. But yeah, the Alpine walking track kind of set me off on the ultra thing. And I'm not really an ultra runner. I did lots of the 10 to 20K stuff and was reasonably fast as a younger bloke. And then going into the longer distance was really just because I like being alone and in the hills. But yeah, no, I ran that in 2011 and it was a great success. I had my rock and roll throughout it. I had the moments of, gee, Beau, this is stupid. Why are you doing this? This is selfish. You're doing massive damage to your body or potentially. What's the point? Who gives a damn that you're running across the mountains? What's the story here? So I had lots of those sort of moments. But, of course, it won out in that I got to the end, and the moments that still resonate to me are very special. And in many respects, I can't tell you about. And not that I don't want to, but they're quite they're very personal. And you've got to be an expert storyteller to translate that. And I'm not always sure I am. So it was excellent.
Oh, you actually touched on what I was going to ask you, which was that's a long time to be alone. It's almost like, in a way, I don't know, because I'm a micro runner. If you're not an ultra marathon runner, but that's a long time to be alone with your own thoughts. Because it's not like you can carry on a conversation with anyone, and so. Well,
you can. They're just not there. Right. I think you're more bonkers if you don't. And I write about that a bit in my book. That there's a big difference between being alone and lonely.
Yes.
And so, or loneliness, I suppose you'd say. I really love the aloneness because I think, you have those wonderful conversations. You get to listen finally to, I suppose, what either you're saying or what's around you. I just have to wander around my little farm here, and it's a very existential, philosophical thing to think. But if you're a human going forward in life, physically, you've got you're following your eyes, you're following your shoulders, whatnot. If you make a conscious decision just to think about what's coming at you rather than what you're taking to it, an awful lot comes in. And when you're running through the bush and you think, you know what, I'm just going to think about for the next few hours everything that's in my vision that's coming towards me rather than this whole bow, because you can, you ask all these questions. Well, get rid of all that, man, and just think about what's in front of you. And it's a bit like eating beans because it's quite liberating. You're just thinking about what is coming at you, and it means that you're not in the picture.
I was going to say it is interesting, and I guess it highlights as well too today the entertainment that we're around. I mean, you go back. I mean, in the very, very short span of history, the last 50 odd years, TVs and before that we had the wireless for maybe the last 100 years or whatever it would be. But before that, we didn't have any of that. I mean, now you've got your phone on you all the time, and you're just constantly stimulated. You constantly, you even see people on the bus. I mean, even when I was a kid, going to school, people would be on the bus, they'd be sitting, they'd just be thinking, or they might read a paper or they might read a book. But most of the time, people were just sort of sitting there and they were thinking. There is no opportunity. Well, there is, but people don't take it anymore. They're just constantly reading. They're on social media or they're playing games or, we got you, or something like that. So there isn't a lot of what you're saying going on. So in terms of being, it's amazing. I just wonder what impact it's having on the psyche of people generally, that they're not actually taking that time out to be alone with their thoughts anymore.
Well, look, I know that there was great resistance from, the world, really, when books came out or when books became cheap. When the printing press really started to churn out books where the middle class could buy them and lo and behold, the lower class could buy books. The book was very much what our smartphone is nowadays. And so I know there's always a different version in history of these things that come along that people think is the devil or that think is ruining the precious human mind. I'm not sure humans think any less or worse these days. They just think differently. And so I don't know whether that's good or bad. I'm a parent now for the first time in my life. And so that question becomes even more important because we're now a translator of knowledge and not just a vessel of it trying to fill ourselves up ourselves. We're trying to do a better job for someone else. So, I'm thinking about, these are all great things to think about. And I don't know the answers to these things, but the fact that we're thinking them is a good thing because I don't think a lot of people do. Maybe that's your point. Maybe we're not as critical of ourselves anymore because something is being force-fed to us where we don't have the opportunity to be critical.
Mm-hmm. I remember, we talk about modern technology taking over, and there is in your area, in Warrigal area, which is southeast of Victoria, there's a train track, and most people catch a train when you go on a train track. but you decided to go on a disused train track for 43 Ks and run the entire length of it, whether it went through properties or not. And I think I'm quoting here correctly that you had to jump 173 fences to complete this run. Is that correct? That was hilarious.
Yeah.
Got pulled over by the police and everything.
Yeah, it was a lot of fences. It was they were a bit of a blur. In saying that too, it's amazing the human memory. When something like a fence really punctuates an experience, and if I'm to close my eyes and think from the very first step to getting into the old replica train station at the end, I could think of all those fences, and they all just dot the whole journey. It was a great trip. In fact, it's probably, Steve-O, one of my favourite stories in that it was clean and neat, in that it's in my backyard. It was a 24-hour shoot. I was willing to be, it's the only real area I'm really willing to sort of test the boundaries of being illegal in a sense, because I figured, look, by default of being here my whole life and my dad being here my whole life, I kind of know most people. Mm-hmm. And so it's, look, I don't mean you no harm. I'm Gary Miles' son. I'm Beau. I live in Jindivick. I've got a couple of cows myself. I know that I'm not going to be doing yours any harm. If I was to do this in the hinterland of New South Wales, I think I'd be happily arrested or get shot, because it's just not my turf in a sense. In saying that too, I genuinely trespassed on dozens of property, and I'm torn about that, because people, there was a couple of people that were most really loved the idea that I'm retracing this line that's their part of as well. It's their history. Anyway, that was a great story. I'm really proud of that film, and I think it's a good chapter in the book too. It's kind of, and that's what a book does, Steve-O. A film is an essence of what took place, right? That took 10 or 12 hours to run. It then allows me to then expand on that and take, a 2 hour, it would probably take 2 hours to read the chapter of that story, and it expands it and fills in some of the gaps, gives a bit more context, and the same story in two very different ways. And it's bloody ace. I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, it's great. I mean, there's so many great stories in this book. Even the one where you decided to spend the night up a tree outside the front of your house. I mean, that's like a childhood dream. Actually, what a lot of your stories are is like a bit childish in a way, in a good way, because it's like, hey, I want to walk to work 90 Ks. I want to run the train track. I want to, and this is a very free spirit, and spend the night up a tree, which seemed quite uncomfortable actually. But just watching that video, that was quite interesting. You were about 9 meters up.
It took me it took me most of the night to get used to the movement, Steve. I imagine it would be like, spending your first night in a boat if you're not a boater. Just that movement, you're constantly moving and you're sort of wobbling around, and the whole tree was the same. And what a nice thing to think that tree's been wobbling around like that for a lot longer than my entire family's been in the area. That you're embraced by this big thing of history, a big old tree, which was just cool. So I just laid there most of the night thinking about history and about my part of it, and mortality is a big thing I often think about, because death scares the heck out of me. So that was a really fun thing. And your comment about childish or childhood, it's funny that we make that's a derogatory thing to say to someone when they're making a fickle decision or something that we think is not thought of. We think, that's a childish decision. If we made more childlike decisions, I think we'd probably be better off.
I totally agree.
100% agree.
Yeah.
I look at my 7-year-old and I think, man, the joy that he has over the smallest things, yes, he can crack it as well too, and there's the maturity thing there, but the joy that kids typically can find in the most small things is just,
Yeah, we beat it out of ourselves, hey?
Yeah.
And, so parenting 101, I try and keep that in mind whenever May's doing something that's a bit wacky and she's trying to light the fire, or she's carrying around a pair of scissors at a great rate of knots. I try and temper what is good and what is bad, or what's undangerous or not, because I know I did the same thing.
Well, with Steve, we're running a bit short on time. So I was going to say to Beau and to you, Steve, any other things in the book? Any other last things that you just...
he did a little kayak one day for 2,000 kilometres, and a little bit, another little childish thing that in a good way is, can you paddle from mainland Australia to Tasmania? You can, can't you, Beau?
Well, it's been done plenty of times, and I'm just one of the wealthy white folks that tends to do it now. Yeah, there's be more than 500 people have done it now, I imagine. And that's a really tame stretch of water if you get it on a tame day,
Right.
which is a lot of the time.
Right.
It's super volatile when it's not, because it's so shallow between very deep water with huge, so you've got this huge run of water from Antarctica. And so Bass Strait, as we know, is famous when it's bad, and but it's a mill pond when it's not too, because it's nice and shallow and calms down quickly. So yeah, I paddled that in 2016 with a whole bunch of with 3 close mates, and it was excellent. It was a wonderful. I've never really been a shared sea kayak man, in a sense. I've guided an awful lot, but that's different. The guiding is different, whereas expeditionary travel, I've a lot of the time been by myself. So I just laughed the whole time. It was fantastic, and shared it with these really good dudes, and had I suppose you'd say, a real blokey trip out there. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. And you just realise, golly, that is one spectacular piece of island landscape, seascape. It's awesome.
So, Beau, before we wrap up, anything else that you wanted to sort of talk about with us? Any sort of highlights out of the book, or any of your trips, or anything that you wanted to sort of let the people know?
No, look, and I'll probably beat you to the punch. It's all about what's out in front, I suppose, because what is out in front is always a reflection of what's taken behind. And I don't say that as this philosophical thing, but I often don't think we dwell on all the cool things we've done in the past, and that's what a book does. A book can be this great deposit lands of all this great stuff you've done, and people know that things like journaling and having a good yarn to your best mate around a campfire or over a bottle of wine, it's so cathartic. And in many respects, writing that book was that. It fills in some of the gaps that you wanted to go back and have a look at. So I look forward to just doing more stuff, so that it continues this big wheelhouse of doing things, thinking about it, doing things, thinking about it, and sharing it with an audience. And I have no problem with that in terms of my ego, because I think people can either watch it or they don't, or read it or they don't. And so I'm happy to live and die by that. And so no, I'm just going to do a lot more stuff, and I hope you folks keep clicking on things and watching it while it keeps you interested. Otherwise, get rid of me.
Wow.
And I was going to say, have you got anything on the horizon, any major events planned?
Yeah, so this year's been a big filming year. COVID was a bit of a blessing in some respects, in that we just shot a whole bunch of things. I'm shooting at the moment, halfway through shooting Bad River, which is a 4-part series that'll go live on YouTube by the end of the year. They're bankrolling it. They're paying for it, Google and YouTube. And Screen Australia, which is our big governing body for film in Australia, is starting to see the light that people are going less to the broadcasters and TV, and online is where people's viewing pleasure is happening. And so, yeah, 4-part series will come out, and that's paddling the worst rivers in Australia. So I'm halfway through filming that right now, and that is a sensory explosion. I'm totally immersive in these bad rivers.
Bad rivers, like as in terms of polluted.
Yeah, polluted, and various forms of pollution. So one's the result of 100 odd years of mining. One's the result of being smack bang in the middle of Sydney. One's the result of global warming, and one is the result of being the biggest river that we have. And you could probably imagine what all those rivers are. And so, yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I've been on rivers and sea my whole life, or whole adult life anyway. And so this is a really different take on things. It's often not very pretty. It's quite confronting. It's unhealthy. And yet they're brilliant adventures. And and I know I'm part of this problem, right? In my PFD is a phone with all of these precious metals in them. That is the mine that has made a bad river in Tasmania. I'm part of that. We all have this insatiable thirst for copper and for tin. And so I tread cautiously on how and where these rivers became the way they are, because I'm part of that big machine. So it's sort of unpacking myself as much as it is how it is we kill the very thing that gives us life. It's where you think, how can we do this? And then you've got to put yourself in the spotlight a bit too.
Well, I think like anything, I think there is ways to be able to do it. I mean, even with animal husbandry as well too, and the way that we get our meat. There was a great documentary a while ago called Food Inc. I think living in harmony and doing things well. I always get frustrated, I think, when some of these movements get hijacked by big business and they sort of bait and switch and they pretend that they're doing good things, but they're actually not. That's the thing that probably worries me a lot, because there is a lot of virtual signaling. But I think in terms of looking after the planet, looking after the water table, cleaning up some of these industries that are absolutely rank and file polluting as well too, 100%. We need to bring an awareness around exactly how bad the problem is, and then bring in some kind of social pressure to get these companies to clean it up. And we've got to be realistic. That's going to come at a cost. But better that cost out of the financial, out of your hip pocket than, damaging the environment to a point where, it's ruining ecosystems and of course then having blowback onto to us as humans as well too. So sounds like a fascinating, documentary. It'd be really good to see what you found and maybe what your insights are as well, in terms of how you think we might be able to improve.
Yeah, well, once again, I'll try not to give many answers. I think people have known for a long time, and whether that's 10 years or 50 years, that this is not right. But hindsight tends to take a generation or two to really bite. Where our scientists have known about this since the 80s and since the 70s, and Indigenous cultures probably knew about it a lot earlier than that. So it's when do we accept what our future selves have said, and see those silly buggers back then, they knew they were doing the wrong thing and yet they still kept doing it. Yep. When do we start to listen to our future selves? When does that tipping point happen?
Well, you look at things like, James Hardy, asbestos. I mean, you look at things like smoking. You look at all these things. And this is why I get really frustrated as well, too, about silencing dissent. Voltaire, Steve and I say it all the time. I might not agree with what you say, but I will fight to the death to defend your right to be able to say it. Because as soon as we start sanitizing what can and can't be said, you'll have dissenting people who are saying, hey, we've got the smoking gun here, smoking causes cancer, or, whatever issue you want to put in that was considered to be conspiracy but is now considered to be fact. And that's what worries me, especially when, and this is why I love, videos like yourself, even if you're not potentially bringing a solution, but you're bringing awareness, which then makes and forces people to confront it and start asking questions and demanding better from industry and from government. Because without these things, then they can get swept under the rug, or they can, we're dealing with them, and they never actually are. So, excellent. I look forward to seeing it. I think we're out of time.
We are, unfortunately.
But this was great. I really enjoyed meeting you, and you got some great stories there. So if people want to hear more about yourself and your adventures, where can they go and learn about your book as well too?
Yeah, just jump on Booktopia for the Backyard Adventurer, or just jump online. You Google me and you'll find my YouTube channel on my website with blogs and things. But start with either or, it doesn't matter. But YouTube's a pretty good start. And then the book unpacks what YouTube has done in some respects in the last 5 or 6 years. And hopefully it's a good yarn. And thanks, fellas. Thanks for having me on. I like the green bush hanging on the wall, and the cleanliness of and the sharpness of your minds. Very good.
When you have my wife, who is a graphic designer, I guess, self-trained. No, the aesthetics have nothing to do with Steve and I. No. Ours would probably be a little bit more rustic like yours, which I actually really, really enjoy as well too. That speaks a lot to your character. So
a half-finished addition to the house.
Love it. That's great. Fantastic, Beau. Thanks so much, mate.
Thanks, fellas. Great to chat.
Good to talk.
Thanks,
Take care,
mate. See you next time.
Bye.
Good on you.
Bye.